Thank you. Hi, I am Linda Heisman-Powell, and I serve as Chair of the Behavior Analyst Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Today is Friday, October 10th, 2025. I ask the members of the Advisory Committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being held by conference call and other electronic medium. Denise Seisman.
Here.
Allison Bell.
Here.
Alec Bernstein.
Present.
Holly Kramer.
Here.
Wes Dotson. No?
I don't see Wes on the call.
Yeah, I don't either. Emily Kessler.
Here.
Pamela Neidert.
Here.
Piqua Lamb Chestnut.
Here.
Stephanie Wiley.
Here.
And Alice Zhang.
Here.
I note the following BSRB staff members are also present: David Fye.
Here.
And Leslie Allen.
Here.
Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
Thank you, Linda. This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about any concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the executive director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at this meeting as no individuals requested time for public comment. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely by conference call and other electronic media, I state for the record the following information. Access to this meeting is being conducted by medium of interactive communication, allowing members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call or by viewing the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of KOMA are not suspended. As such, we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On August 20th, 2025, we sent notice of the meeting to all individuals who requested notice of meetings. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line "Request for the agenda," and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if we have any technical issues during the meeting, you may send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of this meeting will be available on the YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And I did check the conference call line before we got started. There's no one currently on the line, but if I hear someone beep over and introduce themselves, I will let you know.
Thank you. The meeting is now called to order, and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the first item on the agenda, which is approving the agenda.
I move to approve the agenda for the October 10th meeting.
Thank you, Denise.
Second.
Allison seconded it. All in favor? Raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Allison. All opposed, same sign. Nope. Okay. Agenda is approved. So now we would like to welcome our new advisory committee member, Holly Kramer. So I think we should go around and everybody give a little bit of introduction of themselves so that Holly, you can feel comfortable. I'm Linda Heisman-Powell. I think our paths have probably crossed at some point. I'm currently serving as the chair of the advisory committee, and I sit on the board as one of the psychology representatives for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board in this capacity. In other capacity, I'm out there advocating for services, quality services for kids with autism, and trying to, make sure families have what they need in order to be able to feel connected, supported, and make sure their kids are successful. So that's who I am. And from there, I'm going to kick it over to you, David, so you can give a little bit of yourself and then pass it off to someone else.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm David Fye, Executive Director for the BSRB, and really excited to work with you on the advisory committee. So thank you for volunteering your time. This committee is really important to the work of the board. As a composite board in Kansas, we are sort of like having 7 agencies in one, but to make sure that we hear the voices of individuals from each of the 7 professions, these advisory committees really provide a unique opportunity for the board to do certain work and then refer items to these profession-specific committees. And so, but each of you has a different background and a different experience, and you bring a different perspective to this advisory committee. And so that is really valuable as well. And so, I'll go ahead and just kind of say that if you ever need anything from our office, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to assist you. And if I can't provide it for you, I'll connect you to someone who can. And then I will refer the next person to Leslie Allen. She's the Assistant Director and Licensing Manager for the BSRB, and she can introduce herself as well.
Good afternoon. My name is Leslie Allen. As you said, I'm the Assistant Director and Licensing Manager. I have been with the board since 1999, and the thing I like, I guess, why I stayed here is I like statutes and regulations, so that makes me kind of an oddball, but I'm here anyway, and I'm glad to meet you.
All right, thank you, Leslie. So from there, I'm just going to go in order on my screen. Piqua.
Hi, my name is Piqua Lam Chestnut. I'm also a new member. I joined last time. It was my first meeting. I am currently a assistant professor at the University of Central Missouri in the behavior analysis program. So I'm very devoted into kind of our field in ABA. And then when I first moved to the Kansas, Missouri area, I was in Kansas in Alexa. So I'm very connected with the Kansas side, although I do now reside on Lee Summit, which is very close still. But so that's kind of a little bit about me. I mainly just teach. I have some clinical background in training in the field, and currently I mainly teach the behavior analysis program at UCM. So welcome and nice to meet you.
Linda, I think you were muted there.
Alec. Sorry.
I'm Alec. I'm a senior behavior analyst over at Children's Mercy in Kansas City. So I help with our inpatient consultation team and our severe behavior outpatient program and our research core that we have too.
Thanks, Alec. Alice, you're next.
Hi, my name is Alice Xiang, and I am at KU Medical Center, currently a faculty there and doing research and some clinical work related to supporting parents of children with autism. And I think, Holly, we haven't met, but we talked in the past to try to help families. So really excited that you are part of this committee.
Yeah, thank you. All right, Denise, you're up.
Okay, thanks. Welcome, Holly. Denise Sisman. I'm a public member on the board as well as on this advisory committee. I've been with the board for a little over a year now, so still relatively new, and really enjoying this and appreciate the opportunity to do this work. By profession, I am the executive director of the Kansas chapter for the American Academy of Pediatrics, and also have a great deal of work with the Primary Care Association in Kansas, working with the federally qualified health centers.
Thank you, Denise. Pam?
Hi, I'm Pam Neidert. I am associate professor in the applied behavioral science department at the University of Kansas, and I direct the Edna Hill Child Development Center, which is part of the department, and we do clinical and research training of undergraduate and graduate students there. So I've been there for almost 18 years at this
I
point.
can't believe it, I sometimes, Pam, I still think of you and Claudia as the new
Just arriving.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
me
clear,
too.
yeah.
Me too.
So, Stephanie, David, can you change her name?
I can.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, I am Nikki Willie. I'm a BCABA at New Hope Therapy Services in Wichita. And I'm the assistant clinical director here and help with just running of the daily clinic.
Thank you. Emily?
Hi, I'm Emily. I don't know how long I've been on this board. It's been a little bit.
It's been a minute.
It's been a second. But I actually came to become a BCBA through the education side. I was a special education teacher by trade and was in a school district that did not have a BCBA, but it was a large school district here in the Kansas City area. And I was lucky enough to become a BCBA. I worked home and community to get my supervision hours and continue to work on the education side. I work for a grant from the Kansas Department of Education, and we support schools by going in and helping them set up multi-tiered systems of support. My area of specialty obviously is behavior and social emotional learning. So
Thank you. Allison, you're next.
Holly, you and I have hung out quite a bit, so I think you kind of know me already, but I'm Allison Bell. I am the current outgoing president of KansABA. I'm also a board certified behavior analyst at the doctoral level in my private practice. Nikki is with me. I'm currently sitting at KU Memorial Union because I cannot get the Wi-Fi to work, which is why I'm on my phone. So I think that's a good enough summary.
Thank you. Holly, would you like to share a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in being on the board?
Absolutely. So, of course, I'm Holly Kramer, and I live out in Russell, Kansas. So, when I became a BCBA, was the only one within about 150 miles for a while. So, I grew up in Western Kansas. I'm just really a strong advocate to make sure that all of our rural and underserved communities can have access to care. So yeah, I'm the senior clinical director for a program. We work Kansas Behavior Supports. We recently transitioned to Heartland ABA, and we started in Kansas with 16 back in 2019. And now we're just extremely passionate about home and community-based care in collaboration with schools.
Thank you. And we all want to welcome you to the board. Yay, welcome.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to hand it back over to you, David, to talk about expectations for advisory committee members.
Okay, thank you, Linda. And feel free to add anything after I kind of lay out some of the technical expectations first, and feel free to share anything as chair of the advisory committee in this regard. But as a new member, I do like to kind of welcome the new advisory committee members and kind of clarify the role of the advisory committee. I know you've reviewed the advisory committee policy, and I appreciate you expressing interest in serving on this committee. And as I said before, it's a really important committee. And so in terms of expectations, I think, one of the basic ones is just, plan to attend these meetings regularly. We will send out polls to try to find times if they have to occur at an unusual time, but most of these meetings have been remote, which has allowed us to get more people across the state to participate. So most of these you'll be able to log in on Zoom. And then I would encourage you, when there are sort of homework assignments or we ask you to review something ahead of the meeting, just go ahead and review those documents. And then always feel free to share your thoughts. If you have questions about anything, feel free to offer that up too. But yeah, every member of the advisory committee brings a unique perspective, and it really works well when everybody is participating in the discussion and we can kind of hear those things. In terms of the role of the advisory committee, one thing we always do try to make sure everyone understands is this is essentially a subcommittee of the BSRB. And so it works to support the work of the board. And the board is created by the legislature as a state agency. It exists to protect the public primarily, although it also wants to, have good customer service for the licensees and applicants when we issue licenses, and we work on resolving complaints. One of the main functions of the advisory committees is to consider items the board has referred to the advisory committees for discussion, and also to initiate some conversation to make recommendations back to the board. So in your role in the advisory committee, you may not have the authority as a group to, officially have something put into law, for example, but you can make a recommendation back to the board to request a statutory change, for example, or maybe a change to a regulation. And then your chair of this advisory committee will basically carry that forward back to the regular board at the board meeting. And then it's the board all working together that considers those recommendations. And so I know in certain groups, people have been used to wearing multiple hats. And so maybe you're in a group that's more of an advocacy type group. And so here there can kind of be a little bit of a blurred line because there can be some interest the board has that maybe the associations would have similar goals. In this forum, it's really more about educating yourselves on different topics and then making recommendations back to the board in terms of, let's say, advocating for a profession that's something a little bit outside of the jurisdiction of the advisory committees. So you can always talk about different topics. You can always say, we're supportive of making a recommendation to the board in this regard. But in terms of really that advocacy role, that's a little bit more of the association role versus the advisory committee or the board itself. But I do think, this board works, or this advisory committee and the board work really hard to be good stewards of the law. We've done a lot of work reviewing the statutes and regulations to see if there's any items that would be good to have updated or modernized. If we look around at different states to see what are other states doing compared to Kansas, to see, are we following the trend? Are we setting a good example for those states that are kind of following us? And so we're kind of keeping an eye on that too. So anything that you're aware of at a national level you think would be helpful for the advisory committee, that's something helpful too. And so at each of the meetings, there is the agenda. There's the opportunity to request that something be added to the agenda that's under the approval of the agenda item. So if there's ever any topics that you feel like would be beneficial for the advisory committees to consider, you could send an email to myself or the chair of the advisory committee, Linda, and say, I think it'd be a good idea for the advisory committee to think about talking about this topic, or I saw this in the news. I think this would be important for the advisory committee to consider. And so always feel free to reach out to us. In terms of some of the more specific technical expectations, as I mentioned, this is basically a subcommittee of the BSRB, which is a state agency. And because it is a state agency, there are some different rules that we have to follow. There are some laws in place like the Kansas Open Meetings Act, or the KOMA, that I talked about earlier. And if you're not familiar with working in this function for a state agency, essentially one of the main things to know about the KOMA is if you're used to being a part of groups that did a lot of work outside of the official meetings, like let's say you did a lot of email communication back and forth, usually that's something that we need to avoid if it involves the advisory committee outside of a meeting. We can send out information as long as it's one way, but when you start to have interactive discussions outside of the meeting, that's where it gets a little tricky. So, and actually, I'll just kind of lay out the three things there that you need to be mindful of. So the Open Meetings Act, the big takeaway for today is that if there was something that would involve a majority of members of the committee, so a majority of members, if it would be interactive communication, so back and forth discussion, and it would be on a topic relevant to the advisory committee, those types of conversations need to occur at a public meeting. And there's requirements about those public meetings. We take care of that on behalf of the board and the advisory committees in terms of putting out notice, making sure the public can observe those meetings, things like that. But that's why, we basically say, if you're going to be talking with all of each other about something and it's not going to be an official meeting, you need to avoid that kind of communication. And people are used to that in terms of, let's say, a meeting. But I think one area that people may not always think about in that regard is the email communication. because email communication does fit that criteria too. If it's you hit that dreaded reply all kind of thing, and then all of a sudden you're having back and forth communication. And so it's okay to reach out to me on any questions you have, Leslie. You can reach out to Linda as chair. We're always happy to help you. You just need to be cautious if you were to respond and start communicating back and forth with members of the committee outside of a meeting. And then the other item I always try to make people aware of at the beginning is just a very basic thing. There's the Kansas Open Records Act, KORA. And so as a state agency, potentially your communications involving the BSRB or the advisory committee could be considered an open record and could be requested. So you're all professionals here, but I always try to remind people, sometimes we can get a little casual in our conversation by email. And so just always keep in mind any of those could be considered a record. So just always stay professional. And if you ever are contacted by anyone concerning your work on the board or the advisory committee and you need some guidance on a particular topic, let us know. We will go through an annual training, which is about an hour long, that'll go into a lot more details of some of the technical rules. And I would encourage you to also start to review some of the documents on the BSRB website, like the expectations for board members. Even though you're not board members, it helps to kind of review that document to see how the advisory committee fits within the purpose of the board. So there's some policy documents like that on the website, but just start to become familiar with reading maybe the statutes and regulations for the profession as well. And then come to the meetings and just ask questions and, kind of find your voice. But just thought I'd lay out some of those, policy type considerations and then also the technical considerations. But if you ever do have any additional questions, feel free to reach out. There may be things you think about right after a meeting ends. So it's always okay to send an email and then I can help you out or connect you to somebody who can. So. But I'll refer it back to Linda. And then as chair of the advisory committee, Linda, if you have any other expectations for members, feel free to share those as well.
I think you hit on the one that for me primarily was the one that was not concerning, but the one that I had to be most aware of, which it was, since this is such a small community in Kansas and we all know each other and we all talk and we're all involved a lot in the same level of activities, that you just have to really be aware if you're talking about something that falls under the jurisdiction of your role on this advisory committee, that there are statutes and rules and everything else that governs that behavior or governs what you can discuss and what you can't discuss. So for me, that is probably the thing that you need to really be most aware of. And if you, like David said, if you have any questions, just reach out. Like, is it okay to talk about this? I still do that, right? I mean, a lot of us are still engaged in advocacy, and we're also members of this committee. And so it's just really making sure that there's a clear line of demarcation between those two different activities. So it's sort of like here at KU Med Center, I can go advocate and testify and whatnot. I just can't say I'm doing it on behalf of KU Med Center. So that's what I would think. So anything the rest of the committee thinks that we forgot to tell Holly? Nope. All right. We're good to go on to what?
I just have one more comment, and that is, as we've talked about a little bit, this is broadcast on the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes if members are just used to being on a Zoom, sometimes there's questions of, can we talk about this, or is this confidential? If there would ever be something that we would need to go into, let's say an executive session where things would all be confidential, we'll make it very clear to the advisory committee. Usually in this committee, we won't be going into those types of closed meetings, and under the law, there's only a set of criteria that you can go into an executive session if it meets one of those, but you probably won't need to worry about that. But if it's something outside of a meeting where you ever have a question about if something's confidential or not, feel free to let us know. But as far as these meetings, I'm very proud of our YouTube channel. It's been a nice tool and a resource, and we've shared it with a lot of people. And sometimes, if you have to miss a meeting, you can go back to and rewatch the meeting. And that's a nice way to stay up with what's all going on at the committees too. So
Yeah. Thank you, David. Welcome, Holly. We're excited to have you here. And from there, I would like to move on to our next agenda item, which is approval of the minutes. So has everybody had a chance to review the minutes?
I can make the motion to approve.
Thank you, Alec. We have a motion from Alec. Do I have a second?
A second.
Thank you, Alice. All in favor, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstain? Okay, motion carries. From there, we're going to move on to our executive director's report.
All right, thank you, Linda.
Yeah.
At each of these advisory committee meetings, I usually try to hit on 3 topics. One is agency operations for the BSRB. I try to keep you informed of what's going on here at the office. And then I also provide some updates on legislative activity. And then I try to give you some updates on recent board meetings as well. So we'll start first with agency operations, and I'll just touch on one item, just because this one may not be very visible, but I think it's important that you kind of understand where we're at in this process. We are currently in the middle of a 2-year process to switch over our licensing system for the BSRB. Our staff has been meeting a lot with representatives from the Office of Information Technology Services, OITS, in preparation for switching from our existing vendor, My Licensed Office, to an Acela platform. And this will be through the state's enterprise licensing system. And we're really excited about making this transition because it will allow us to begin to offer an online application process. We've had online renewals for several years, but we're really we've wanted to do this, is move away from the paper applications for a while. But this is now going to be geared towards a series of questions. And so it should also make it easier for people to apply for a license in a certain area and then know in which area they might qualify for licensure or what steps they would need to take next. So we're excited about that. We've been meeting with those individuals, and they've been working to capture all of our existing processes across all of our current forms. And if you are familiar with all the professions regulated by the BSRB, you know we have tiered licensure for almost every profession. And we also have different ways you can get licensure, like original applications and reciprocity. And this is much more complex than the other agencies they've worked with up to this point. But I think it'll be really nice once we're done with this process, and it'll be really helpful. It should integrate a lot of things that our staff does, where we've built solutions over time, but they're not the most integrated solutions. So with this new system, it should be nice. So as I said, we're about maybe 8 months into a 2-year process, and so it's still about a year and a half away from us being totally done, but it's moving forward, and really happy with where we're at in that process. In terms of some legislative updates, there have been a number of health committees that have met over the legislative interim. If you're not very familiar with the legislature, the majority of the work they do each year is in the first about 4 months of the year. They have a legislative session that usually goes about 90 days, but it differs year to year how they count those 90 days. So that session can go until about April. It can go until May. It can go until mid-June. Usually, though, until about April. And then after the regular session is over, there are interim committees that meet and focus on different topics. So there have been a few that have met on certain health topics, and I would encourage you to review the legislature's website for some of those committees. But one in particular we've been really following, and that was a House Special Committee on Government Oversight. And they've been looking a lot at operations for the Board of Nursing. And I want to let you know that even though the BSRB was not the focus of their meeting, we always try to stay up to date with what the legislature is looking at, what questions they are asking, and we are always trying to make improvements and learn. And so what they were looking at specifically for that committee had to do with their renewal process when licenses are going to expire, their reinstatement process for people to get a license back after their license has expired, also their investigation and disciplinary processes to see if they're providing enough information for members of the public to know how that process works. And so we've been kind of watching what questions they've been asking, and we've had internal conversations and other conversations with the board in terms of our processes. And I think in general, I feel pretty good about where we're at. I think we can always learn from each other and make improvements. And so we're continuing to watch some of those things. But I think we're just monitoring those. So if you were going to go and look at a couple of interim committees, I would encourage you to look at those meetings that have occurred over the last few months. There have been two meetings in particular. I think those would be helpful. If you do want to go back and watch the meetings, the legislature does have a YouTube channel as well. And so those meetings were broadcast. They are lengthy, so they're all-day meetings, but there is some good information and really interesting dialogue that has been taking place. I think it's likely that there will be some legislation in the spring, maybe just for the Board of Nursing, maybe a little bit broader for agencies, but we'll have to take a wait and see approach to see, how that's going to look. But we'll continue to monitor that. In terms of some updates from board meetings, the board has met twice since your last advisory committee meeting. There's a regular board meeting that takes place every other month for about 3 hours. And then once a year, the board holds an in-person meeting only, and that moves around the state. And it really is an opportunity for the board to come together in person and work on items which require a more in-depth discussion, and also do some planning for the future, talk about legislative items, that kind of thing. So at the regular board meeting that took place September 8th, 2025, one of the main items was the board continued to review the unprofessional conduct regulations, to go item by item to see if they can sync up language across professions, or if there's items that are missing for one profession, to see if those should be added or adjusted. So this will be something the board has been working on for the past several meetings. You all did a great amount of work on this topic too, to make recommendations to the board. So I just want you to know this item is moving forward, but the board is really having an in-depth discussion about each one of these items. So I think by the time the board is done, we'll be able to submit this language through the Department of Administration, then through the Attorney General's office. And then if it's approved by both offices, we'll be able to open it up for public comment for 60 days. And at that point, we will make sure you're aware of that. So any of the groups that you work with, or any members of the public that maybe colleagues of yours, have the opportunity to review that and provide public comment back to the board before the board would adopt those changes. So we're still working through that process, but I do think if you're not familiar with the giant grid that is on our website, it might be helpful for you to take a look at that document, because I think it is really neat to see the different items side by side, and to see how just there's slight variations of language. And I think in the future, it'll be much more consistent across the levels of licensing and the types of licensing. So there were some appointments to advisory committees. There was a decision by the board to go ahead and start working with a company called eBOS. And this eBOS company is a group that provides licensing boards with some additional disciplinary tools. And so we have the complaint review committee that works as a subcommittee of the board to review investigations against practitioners and complaints against practitioners, and then come to decisions. There's certain tools that committee has, such as, if someone has a disciplinary violation, the CRC could basically say this person should be under supervision with a focus on these topics. There could be a suspension, there could be a fine, there could be a requirement of continuing education. What eBOS does is it provides even more options. And so let's say there's a violation that would involve, let's say, confidentiality. So what eBOS could do is, if the person agreed to use the services under eBOS, they could have some additional training in that area, and then essentially have an examination that ensures that they have really learned what the issues are, and that they are more aware of these things as a practitioner moving forward. Or they also do things where someone writes a paper and then it's graded and then reviewed with their experts. And so the idea is that with these additional resources, someone who had gone through this process, who had a disciplinary violation, could be a better practitioner by going through that experience. So there is still the accountability and making sure that if someone has, done something wrong, that there is the accountability, but also it is an opportunity for the person in most situations to be a better practitioner. Of course, there will be situations where something very severe has happened and suspension or revocation is appropriate in those situations. But I think as much as possible, I know the board wants to work with licensees to help them become better licensees through the process. So the board did express a desire to work with EBOS, and the CRC will be collecting information on that to move forward. And then I guess I'll move next to the out-of-town board meeting. I talked about the all-day meeting the board had, and that meeting did take place on Monday, September 29th. The last few years, we have moved that around. The first year, we couldn't hold that in person because of the pandemic. This was back in, I think it must have been 2021. And then since that point in 2022, we had it in Kansas City, the next year, Wichita, and then last year, Lawrence, and this year we had it in Manhattan. So we've really tried to move this and provide an opportunity for people to attend it in person around different areas of the state. Also looking at major population centers too. But we had a good meeting. I think one of the items that we provided the board on was some updates on licensing. And I'm happy to say that we still are seeing a growth in the number of licensees that are entering the professions overall. Some of the professions are kind of a little bit flatter than others, but overall the licensing numbers are continuing to climb. At some point, I think we expect that to change, either to start decreasing or to kind of level off, in part because of the multi-state compacts that have recently been passed for some of the professions. We have a number of individuals that live outside of the state who get a license in Kansas, and they also have a home state license in another state. But we think with these multi-state compacts, what they will start doing is shifting to holding a license in their home state and then let their Kansas license expire because they get a multi-state license in that state. Or they may pursue another option like authorization to practice under the SIPAC compact for psychologists, or get a privilege to practice under the professional counseling compact. So it's really going to change the way that we view practice and licensure. So we'll kind of have to watch for that over the next few years, but at least for right now, the totals do continue to grow. The board talked a little bit about goals and talked a little bit about where we are today and where we want to be in the next few years. And I've been with the agency now for 5 years. I came on board in November of 2020. And so it was a very different time back then. But over these 5 years, I think we made a lot of good quality improvements. We've been fortunate to be able to add staff to the BSRB, which has allowed us to prioritize workloads for staff members a little bit differently and be more efficient with certain things. But I think that there's still work to do, and we still want to make sure that we're meeting the expectation in terms of protecting the public and also providing good customer service. And so what we brought to the board was a proposal to work on a strategic plan for the agency. And so in the past, we have not had one of these for the BSRB, but we saw some value in collecting additional board member input and really build something that would last for several years. And so for the next year, the board has decided to work on the creation of a strategic plan by doing the SWOT analysis and those other steps you may be familiar with. And then at the end of this year, to have a multi-year plan so we can kind of see the future of the BSRB moving forward. So really excited about working with the board on that topic. Additionally, the board reviewed items for legislation. Most of these items were things that the board had recommended back at the end of 2025 or 2024. We were hoping to have these items through the legislature in the 2025 legislative session, but based on some technical issues and some timeline deadline issues, we were not able to have the bill run this year. But that should not be an issue for the 2026 legislative session. But we did want to go back through those items and see if the board wanted to recommend those items continue to move forward. And the board did recommend those items continue to move forward with some adjustments. One of the items most relevant to your committee is the board did confirm that they want to include adding a new member to the board, a 13th board member, so that there would be a board member for the behavior analysis profession. There is currently not one, but the other 6 professions regulated by the board, there is at least one board member for each of those professions. So the board was supportive of adding the behavior analyst position to the board. For that to take place, though, it will need to be enacted by the legislature. So that will need to get passed by the legislature this coming spring. But yeah, really, really good meeting with the board. And then I mentioned those legislative meetings with the Board of Nursing, partially in response to those and just wanting to make sure the board was aware of what was all in our policy on this. Several years ago, the board put together about a 10-page document that is the investigation policy for the BSRB. And it walks through, in what areas the BSRB will initiate or review complaints, the role of the board in terms of forming that complaint review committee that I talked about, who serves on the complaint review committee. It also talks about the role of the executive director, legal counsel for the board, the investigators, how that process works. It talks a little bit about if there is a violation, the different remedies that could come from that, either through a consent agreement order or through a summary proceeding order. So I think, without getting too much in the weeds, I think it's a really good document, and we've had that posted on our website for years. So it's a really good tool and resource. And also, if you have not seen this on our website for disciplinary complaints, we also have a series of frequently asked questions. So there is information there too. So in terms of reviewing the concerns by the legislature towards the Board of Nursing, we wanted to make sure that we have something to help address those questions right now. And so for most of those items, I think the board was pretty happy with what we have in place. Currently, there are 5 members on the complaint review committee, but the board said, since there are 12 members on the board, it may be helpful to add an additional member to the CRC. So at the board meeting, there was a board decision to add a 6th member to the CRC. And so that will probably be something.
David?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I also feel weird because I can't like raise my hand or like flag you down. So, I do have a question about that piece. It was actually brought up. I was having a discussion about something else that a friend of mine serves on another state's disciplinary review committee, and she asked the question if Kansas has like a investigator for disciplinary procedures. Is that kind of what you're talking about? Like it's a group of 6 people that are doing the investigations? And my follow-up question to that is, if the answer is yes, are any of them behavior analysts? So if they got a behavior analytic disciplinary, are any of them behavior analysts?
So we have a full-time staff member who does investigations, and then another staff member who is an investigator and also a licensing specialist for clinical licensing. So those are 2 staff members. Neither one of them is a licensee under the board. They have just been trained as investigators, and one has been here for about 16 years, and the other, I think, about 12 years. So they've been in those roles for a long time. And we recently took both of them to receive investigator training at the CLEAR conference. I don't know if you're familiar with CLEAR as an organization, but to answer your question, neither one is a behavior analyst. Our investigators have just been staff members that have been trained in investigations.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, and there's ways that states handle that differently. The members who vote on the decisions are the members of the board that serve on the complaint review committee. So even though the investigators collect the information and research that, and I attend those meetings, review the cases to make sure that the processes are followed, it's really the board members that serve in that role on the CRC that have the vote of, is this something that would be a violation based on the information that's been collected? If it's not a violation, is it appropriate for the case to be dismissed? Should there be a warning letter, or should there be a disciplinary order if there was a violation? And so it's the members of the board that are licensed, but there's also a requirement that there's at least one public member on the CRC as well. But yeah, I was just kind of wrapping up that part of the report. We did go through that. The board did recommend adding a 6th member to the complaint review committee. But in terms of who will serve in that role, that's something the board will need to discuss at the next meeting in November. So just kind of want to give you some general updates, but I'll end my report here and see if there's any questions on any items I talked about or any other topics.
No, I have 2 questions, David. The EBAS, the one that we're considering contracting with for people that whose license are sanctioned, or didn't they have outcomes that they presented where they said that, I'm making this up obviously, but 96% of licensees who went through their program successfully completed it and did not go on to reoffend, in essence? Didn't they say they had a really successful? I can't remember.
I don't recall on the outcomes. They did present to the board and they shared some information and some slides, but I don't recall exactly what what
Yeah.
items they talked about.
Okay, well, just so these committee members know, I think that's there. That would, I think, would be something good, David, maybe that we could ask them about, because that would be, using an evidence-based program would be beneficial.
Mhm.
That was one question, and then the other one was about telehealth. It wasn't just a question, but it was there was some information that came out here at K Med Center that said this came from the chat telehealth update. Due to the federal shutdown and the lack of a formal reimbursement extension, KU leadership has decided to proceed with telehealth as usual through October 15th. If the shutdown continues beyond that date, new telehealth visits will be paused and existing virtual appointments will be rescheduled. This approach aligns with national trends as many large programs anticipate resolution. But how does that affect us? Does that affect us? That since behavior analysts do, one of our topics today is looking at telehealth.
I guess it depends. If you mean, does it affect the BSRB in terms of our authority or our requirements? I don't think it would affect our requirements. Seems like that's
Okay.
pointing more towards the reimbursement topic, and
And
usually
insurance.
reimbursements are a little outside
Okay.
of our jurisdiction. So
Yeah. Well, that's what I thought, but then I thought, well, if there's rules that govern the use of that and people use it in opposition to those rules, I just didn't know if that would fall under unprofessional practice.
yeah, it's a good question. And I think in some states there were certain things that were made more flexible during the pandemic, especially. And when things started to return to normal, they were kind of rolled back in. In
Right.
Kansas, I think certain things were made flexible in part because of the pandemic. And then I think there was conversation as things followed, and I think there was a lot of support for just continuing what was done with
Yes, there
telehealth.
was.
And so none of those things here have been rolled back as far as the BSRB was concerned. In terms of anything with more flexibility in terms of reimbursements, that could be. I'm just not aware of that because that's a little outside of what we
Yeah.
handle.
And then the other thing that just reminded me of was the interstate compacts. And I know we had discussed at one point in here the potential of pursuing an interstate compact for behavior analysts, so you don't have to be licensed in all the different states. But I think if I remember correctly, we said that was probably an association issue and not a BSRB issue. So just a thought that as some of this stuff might comes under question or into play, that when we're engaged in these interstate compacts, that I don't know, at some point it might fall under our purview.
Yeah, as I understand it, a lot of those compacts originated with the Department of Defense making money available that could be applied for. And then a lot of the spearheading of that was associations kind of applying for those grants to get the ball rolling. And then if Department of Defense approved them for the grant for that particular profession, then there was money available to bring some assistance in from, let's say, the Council for State Governments, which worked on a lot of the multi-state compact drafting. And then they would reach out to like different representatives of different groups to help out with the language of that. But a lot of that at the very beginning was driven by was money available from the Department of Defense, and then was it granted out through award of an application by those associations, essentially going through that process.
Yeah. So, an ever-changing landscape is what I would call that. Anyway, does anybody else have any questions for David or comments or? Hearing none, I'll move right along to old business. You all should have gotten in your packet the responses to the survey that we sent out. And thank you very much, David, for sending that and also putting the page numbers in the agenda to make it easy for us to locate the topic that we're talking about. The first of which is telehealth.
And I'll just read that question that was included on the survey. And just for the members of the advisory committee that are pretty new to this process, just to kind of frame this discussion, we did do a survey of licensees, permanent licensees in each of our 7 professions this year. It meant sending out survey responses to about 16,000 people and trying to have a different set of questions for each one of the professions. And in some professions, there was a different set of questions for different levels of licensing. So it's been a massive undertaking, but a really good one. And the staff at the BSRB has really helped me in putting together these draft reports that summarize the survey responses. And so what we're doing now is we're going through a couple questions per meeting and just kind of talking about 2 of the questions today. And what I'd like the advisory committee to do is, as we review this information, we'll talk about the summary information that currently exists in the report. A lot of that was members of my staff reviewing this and kind of trying to sort through and highlight items that stood out to them. But also, we wanted to preserve the voice of the individuals who responded to the survey. And so in the back of the survey, there are separate appendices to show the open field responses for each one of the answers. And so you can review the summary information as a 1-page, in most cases, summary, or you can really get into the details and dig through those answers and kind of get a little more context to some of the answers. So as we go through this, I really am curious, since you all bring different perspectives and different experiences and different thoughts, what do you all think about the information that you reviewed? Did it surprise you? Did something really stand out as a trend or a pattern? Or was there one thing in particular that kind of stood out to you? And I'll also say that at the last meeting, Alice did volunteer to do an analysis using AI on some of the questions, and I have that for you. I held on to it, and I'll send it to you after the meeting, but I held on to it because I really wanted you to kind of dig through this on your own first. But I thought that was an interesting item, and so I will send it out to you so you can review it afterwards. So that can be another part of your review process. But I wanted to hear from all of you first. So on that first question, question 16, it does ask both levels of licensing over the past 2 years. Have you experienced any issues concerning telehealth, either through professional practice or observations of other practitioners? And then there were 3 LABAs who completed the survey, so their responses are noted there. And then for the LBAs, 52 LBAs answered this question, and then their information is provided there. So I'll turn it over to all of you. And on the telehealth question, let's focus on that one first. And then when we've kind of wrapped up that discussion, we can move on to the AI question. So what struck you, or what were your takeaways from that one?
David, I promise to never ask you this question again. If you answer it, I'm going to write it down when you say the answer, because I know you've told me at least 4 times. How many LBAs and LABAs do we have in the state of Kansas?
That is a great question. So in the survey report on page 2, at the very bottom of page 2, it says, as of January 13th, 2025, the total number of licensees in the behavior analysis profession in Kansas totaled 506, including LABAs 18 and LBAs, there were 488. So if you combine them both together, about 500. And then it kind of goes from there. But to answer your question, combined total about 500. If you're just looking at LBAs, it's a little under 500.
Okay, thank you so much. That just seems, we got a really good rate on return. I think we've talked about that before. If we had 50 days complete it, though, that's still 10%. That's pretty good.
And I have to say that we had a fair, if not really, response rate, even given the fact that the first set of, they only had how long to respond to it the second time it went out? Because the first time it went out, there was some kind of hiccup and people didn't get it.
So this we were planning to hold it open for a couple weeks.
Mhm.
At the end of that, we really didn't have the number of responses that we really wanted to
Yeah.
get, and so we decided to hold it open for a full month. And so,
Mhm.
so yeah, over that time period is
Okay.
about a month. It was open, and so that's what we got.
Yes. Thank you.
Sure. But any analysis or comments on the telehealth question? It does ask for, do you have any negative issues concerning that? I can start the conversation here in that it was notable to me that, 2 out of the 3 LABAs indicated having no issues with telehealth.
Right.
And then for the LBAs, 52 answered that question, and then 32 indicated experiencing no issues with telehealth. And so
Mhm.
I do think, we want to do the analysis onto the issues that were highlighted, but we don't want to overly magnify those without, we don't want to skip over the fact that the majority of respondents said they have seen no issues with telehealth. I think that is notable to at least acknowledge first, and then we can kind of dive into the issues that others saw in that area. So,
So
what are your takeaways? Yeah. Mhm.
a question about do everybody who responded to this question, they provide services through telehealth or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. The question said, have you experienced any issues either through professional practice or observations of other practitioners? So this could have been a thing that someone saw or, heard about through a colleague.
So we don't, and I'm sorry, I should know this. So do we have a sense of how many are practice using telehealth in their practice overall, good or bad?
Yes.
Okay.
Sort
I'm
of.
sure.
There was a different question. We were trying to quantify sort of the changing dynamic between in-person services and clients, or in-person services versus remote services. So I'll go ahead and share my screen here for a second.
Thank you.
There is a question, it's question 8 in the survey, and it basically says, in a typical week, how many hours do you provide in-person services to clients? And there is a little bit of, it is open for people to define what they mean by in-person services. We've talked a little bit about that. Does that include, the paperwork that people do? But it was basically right next to a question that talked about how many hours per week do you provide remote services. So this question number 8 kind of gave us a little bit of information about how many hours of in-person services people are providing per week. And then the following question, question 9, it basically said in a typical week, how many hours do you provide telehealth or remote services to clients?
Okay.
And at least for this profession, it appeared that the vast majority for both, and there weren't very many LABAs who answered the survey, but of those that did, and also for the LBAs that answered, the vast majority were providing fewer than 5 hours of service remotely per week.
Thanks.
And that differs a lot compared to other professions. Some of the professions that number is much higher, although just kind of depends on the group. And I would say that the numbers overall, though, across professions were lower than I expected.
Mhm.
There's been a lot of
Do you,
positive
were ours,
comments about it. So,
were you saying that ours were higher than you thought they would be or lower?
the number of I would say that providing less than 5 hours per week, the number of individuals who reported that is probably higher than some of the other professions. So
63%. Yeah.
yeah, I
Wow.
think
I don't
some,
know if you can see the screen, Allison.
I'm looking at the survey, but
Okay.
I was trying to get his opinions there.
yeah, I think I can't recall, because we've gone through all 7, but for some of them it is more of a flat line, so it's not as much of a spike for providing fewer than 5. It's kind of some individuals maybe providing over 40 hours or, 20 to 40 hours. But here, while there are a couple, 7.5%, it's a really small number in my opinion. But the comments that I've heard, people are really supportive of tele remote services and teletherapy. It just seems like there has not been, at least in some professions, for some people, a huge shift between moving from in person to moving to all, telehealth.
I would say, given the intensity of the services that we typically provide, that's not surprising. I know that there's been research in our field that looks at the efficacy of the use of telehealth, um, like teaching parents how to do FAs using telehealth, parent training via telehealth that show positive outcomes. But the majority of the work that I think we all still do, unless we're in academics, is the clinical work we do is really pretty intensive and hands-on for the most part. So that doesn't surprise me that there's a difference between behavior analysts and other professions.
Linda, to add on to that, anybody that is serving as a role through education would be not that telehealth as well. So I know that there is a small percentage that's reported that they work primarily in education. And so that would then take out that telehealth portion as well.
Yeah.
And that's true. I think for some other professions, we noticed that as well, that there was, for the ones that did have a lot of individuals working in education, their services that they're providing are a little bit different. And so it's not the same. Any takeaways as far as maybe some of the issues that some individuals noted with telehealth? It seems like some of those involved, technical issues or, maybe individuals that weren't,
I think there's some things missing from there, and as we continue to grow as a field, I think there are going to be more issues brought to light. But I think that one of the issues is having secure, HIPAA compliant ways to do that, because not everybody has access to that, and so I think that's something that's missing from it. But other than that, I think that those issues that are listed on there are pretty standard.
Allison, they did have something that said issues with maintaining confidentiality and HIPAA compliance.
Did they? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I was looking at it, but I did not see that, and now my computer stopped working again. So that's why I didn't ever log into the Zoom, is because my internet's going in and out. So fine. Everything's fine.
One of the things that that stood out to me was that it was reported that they would like more guidance on best practices for telehealth use. I know that the Council of Autism Service Providers put out a document, pretty comprehensive, that I was involved with that, on the use of telehealth for service delivery. How, in response to that comment, so everybody, that's at the bottom of page 19, where I'm looking. In response to that comment, I know that we cannot promote another organization or agency, but is there a way to say there are several agencies that publish guidelines? One of them is the Telehealth Rocks program here through KU, the KU Health System, KU Med Center. They have a telehealth, what is it called, Alice? Telehealth Resource Center, Evelyn's project. And they are, they serve 3 or 4 of the surrounding states as well. So they provide guidelines for all of those different states. Like I said, the Council of Autism Service Providers, or CASP, has a very extensive telehealth recommendation. is there something we can do with that?
Yeah, and I should say this too, as we go through this analysis, we haven't really spent a lot of time talking about when we finish reviewing this survey report, what do we want to do with our conclusions? And I do think, this is something that as we go through these questions and we find things that are notable, we can start thinking of maybe how can we take this information and make recommendations back to the board on ways in which the board can be helpful, or maybe
Right.
encouraging the board to have conversations with other groups about certain things. And so I do think that is something maybe to flag. And then when we circle back around to talk about recommendations, you're right. We can't really, um, we're a little limited because we've had past legal counsel several years ago that basically encouraged the board, to try not to confuse what was something that was required versus something that was not. But but I think in the past few years, as we've kind of been trying to work with other agencies, and I think that there's been changing technology. I think there's been more of a shift towards how can we be helpful without officially endorsing a specific company or association per se. So I think this could be something where if we have a few different ones that are helpful, or we can make some resources available and post them in the materials for, let's say, a meeting or something like that, then people can go back and you could all review it as informational for you, and then we could point to it and say, we think these are pretty good based on our review.
So, David, I really appreciate you bring that up. I was wondering what are we going to do with the information we have? So, a couple of thoughts. One thing is that I feel like we are able to get this information to for us to review and also give recommendation to the board. That's wonderful. Is it also possible for us to somehow create some kind of summary and to be able to share with people who have responded at least, or even with less insured in Kansas, so then so that people know what is being said by other peers. Another thing is that I wonder, because a lot of the questions I feel like it's really related to, we need more guidance, or guidance is not the right word. We need more like continuing education related to, for example, telehealth or AI, right? So I'm just curious to know if like even if as BSBR we cannot provide CE education content, but would it be possible that, let's say, we collaborate with Kanzava or other organizations to be like, hey, here's what is needed by people. Can you provide some like CE content on those things?
I love that idea. Actually, sorry, this is Cans Out the Hat. Hey. One of the things that we are working on doing is bringing back our like mini conferences or the CEU opportunities that we're going to be able to offer midway through the year. And so I think that that's something that we can consider definitely, but I do think that this information needs to be published. I also think that the timeline lapse now that's happened. So like we did this back when, back in February, I think it's dated, and now it's October. We've lost a lot of time there too. So some of these answers may be different now, 6-10 months later.
And that's true, especially we're going to talk about artificial intelligence, and this was a big product. But part of it too was with our existing resources and trying to be good stewards of the finances of the agency. It was unclear if we would be able to pull all of our professions this year. But based on the responses we got back, we were able to kind of add social work a little bit later in terms of polling that profession. And social workers make up 55% of our licensees. So we added the survey for social workers, I want to say either in July or August. So those results we've had just for a little bit, but we wanted to include all 7 professions so we could have a comparative report across all professions. But it is true. Like you are correct. There is some information that people probably provided on artificial intelligence or some other topics that maybe if we pulled them today, their responses would be a little bit different. But hopefully having it all in the same year at least kind of quantifies it within one block of time, even if it's not all right at the same time. So.
Yeah. Piqua has her hand up.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Alice, for bringing up the education piece. That's also the trend that I noticed. And then since my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that the BSRB is not providing CE, right? And specific, piece of education. Then I was thinking, would that be, an option or possible for uh, to check and monitor if they are providing telehealth and if they kind of check that line and then maybe require one CE in that area. That could.
Canva is always willing to sponsor CEs. I think David's actually done a CE for us before too. So if that's ever something that we wanted to do, we could figure that out too.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean that if we provide a CE, we have more control. But if we can't provide a CE, then I think we can consider if we can make that, a suggestion, recommendation to maybe require one CE unit or however for those who are providing telehealth. Because I do see the benefit of, providing telehealth for remote areas, but, for people who cannot go to the clinic, if that's the only thing they can have, right? And then I don't want to take that away from those individuals and individuals who need the services, but we can also kind of help just better monitor the quality of services that we're providing. Just kind of a thought.
And David, do you want to remind us or tell us, I'm not sure that we know what the process is for changing the CE requirements for a profession?
Yeah, so basically the statutes that controls what specifically is required in certain areas. And so there is language in the statutes, at least for most of the professions. I'm not 100% sure about the behavior analysis profession because those statutes were put in place a little differently. But for most of the professions, the statutes outline the requirement of the 3 hours in ethics and now the 3 hours in diagnosis and treatment for certain professions that have that as a requirement. The total number of hours, interestingly enough, is usually just in the regulation. So the BSRB has a little bit more ability to change the total number of hours that someone would have to get every 2 years. And so that's why we've had some conversation about lowering that for certain professions, looking at what other states are requiring. And so that's how that works. And to answer your question, you were correct. The BSRB doesn't currently provide any CEs. We are launching a project this year, late this year, which should be our jurisprudence alternative that we talked about before.
Yeah.
It's
I'm
essentially.
excited for that one.
Me too. And we've been looking at some technology recently, just this past week, and so I think we're close to start to putting it together from the tech side, and then we'll have the questions that we'll be moving forward to. But essentially, what we're going to do with that is instead of having a jurisprudence exam requirement, we would be offering a quarterly 1 hour webinar that would go through the jurisprudence topics. It would be voluntary, but essentially anyone who wanted to attend it, if they were a permanent licensee, would get a free hour of CE credit for attending this quarterly webinar put on by the BSRB. And it would accomplish the board's goal of educating licensees and students or whoever about the rules and the laws in Kansas to hope people would get fewer violations and fewer complaints to kind of and help them become better practitioners too. And so we're working on that. We've made some good progress recently. I think we're close to launching that. But aside from that, I think that's the only CE opportunity that we've talked about for the BSRB. So
yeah, and the thing with that is that the all of the other professions, except for us, would be able to probably have those that are approved through that CE platform, but ours also have to be approved by the BACB as qualifying as a CE event because we're special, which is
Right.
not
No,
necessarily
you're right. So that won't necessarily work for us.
right.
Oh, goodness.
I know. However, I think there's anyway, if if there is a repository and it kind of makes things easier, and if Allison gets her wishes, at some point it's going to interface with the BACB's portal, um, so that
Yes,
they'll
please. Thank you.
automatically transfer over there, right, Allison? Allison?
Yes, that's my wish, my dream, my hope
That is-
someday.
So,
I support your dream. I'm on that dream boat as well. So
um, so I agree that a summary would be good. And do we, I don't want to move off the question, telehealth question yet. But because we were talking about the summary, I really think that would be beneficial. David, do you have a timeline now that we have the social worker stuff out on when? Because I'm pretty sure it's probably going to take up a lot of staff time to compile that and do a summary. Do you have a timeline?
I
for
think
when
we're
you
hoping
be done?
to wrap this process with the surveys by the end of this calendar year.
Okay.
So we're hoping that kind of, this has been a process where we
Mhm.
surveyed the other professions first. We added social workers. We've been having the advisory committees walk through this. Some of the discussion may continue into the next year, especially once we have that comparative report. But I think in terms of having all the reports finalized and then having the comparison report, probably by the end of this calendar year.
Okay. Because I think, Allison, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't meaning, I was sick. So sorry, I didn't realize I wasn't muted.
I think how do you feel about this, David? In addition to making the summary report for each individual profession, and are we planning on posting that on the BSRB website under each profession? Yeah, that's what I thought. And so posting it there, but then at the same time, like I think it was Allison suggested maybe, that we also can send it out to all the behavior analysts in Kansas or who are licensed in Kansas, so they have access to it. What about, I know there are other entities that may be interested in it, like the regulatory board or like the Association for Professional Behavior Analysts might be interested in what's happening in Kansas, or the BACB, or like our professional organizations also like CASP. Send it to Consaba. What do you think about sending it out to select national?
Yeah. So I think the plan was on the BSRB website under resources, there's a publications page. And in the past, we've posted survey reports for a couple of the social work surveys. The goal was to go ahead and post it under publications on the website. And then, notify our licensees that the reports are available and ready for review. But if there's any associations or other groups, feel free to provide that contact information to me. And then it might be better if I just sent one to a representative of those groups and then they could provide it to their members. But I'm
Yeah.
happy to share it with anyone who might benefit from this. We talked a little bit about some of this is not exactly all under the jurisdiction of the BSRB. And, what is the value of collecting information if we can't fix some of these things? But we
Right.
talked about that this could be a good opportunity for us to work with other partners by saying, we're working on what we can work on. We realize that this may be more appropriate for you or your agency or association. So we want to share this data with you now that we've collected it, and then allow you to kind of work with your members and have discussions on it too. So
what do you guys all think of that idea? Sharing it with other folks as well. I think that's a good idea.
And if
Yeah.
any of those groups would want me, or let's say Linda and I don't want to volunteer Linda, but I'm volunteer myself. And then if anybody wants, if Linda wants to do that, but I have a little more availability given my responsibilities for the BSRB. So if you would want me to go talk to a group about the survey once it's finalized too, I'm happy to do that. So
yeah, I think that would be pretty interesting. So how about we can give everybody some homework for our next meeting, because that's going to be in November, right? Which is getting close.
It'll be in December.
No, it's not till
December?
January, right?
Okay, sorry. Is it in January?
It should be December 12th.
Okay.
Oh.
So that's really close to the end of the year, to when you're getting close to finalizing the report. So if everybody is charged with thinking about what organizations we think would benefit from getting some of the results, and then you can bring them back to that meeting so that David has a list. What do you think? Yeah? All right, y'all have homework. So when I do roll call next time, I'm gonna say, Pickwa, what's your list? Alec, what's your list? Holly,
What happened to
you
the
were new to the board, you owe a list too. All right. So did everybody have a chance to look at Appendix 13? It's on page 45. This is that in-depth analysis that David was talking about. Anything on here? Something that you're really good about, David, is keeping us as an advisory committee and the board up to date on changing regulations. Do you post that on the BSRB website?
Yes, there's a section of the website that lists all the current regulations, and then we also have when something is officially open for that 60-day public comment time period, there's another section that says proposed regulations. So we post it there. Recently, just in the last few years, we've also put a news article on our front page, and we publish it in the Secretary of State's publication, the Kansas Register, when we are getting ready for that public meeting for public comment. But people can provide public comment through email ahead of that time too. So that's kind of how we get the word out usually when we're to that point. But there's a lot of steps before that. So if things are still being reviewed by the Attorney General's office or Department of Administration, they're still kind of subject to change. So we usually wait until we've gotten approval from those two groups that we can officially put it out for comment, and then we put out news about it.
Well, I am really glad that you're an attorney. Number one, let me say that up front. But I wonder, I don't want to make more work for you, and this is probably another pie in the sky thing, but if there was any legislation that was going to come before the legislators or up for a vote that's specific to a discipline that's governed by the board, if there could be an email that goes out to them to say, House Bill 2532A is going to be up for committee vote for the social workers. Check out our Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board website to be updated on the latest legislative process, right? Because if we did that, number one, people would be informed, but it would also direct them to our website. Do we do analytics on how many people access that information from our website?
I have not pulled those numbers, huh?
Okay. Just food for thought.
Yeah. And I'm perfectly happy to start with, we do plan to introduce a bill this spring. And I do want to take a step forward. So when I hear about a bill hearing for the BSRB bill, to send something out to, in the past, I've let the board members know when that was going to be heard if we get much of an advance notice. Sometimes we get almost no notice. And so
Right.
we do what we can, but if there is any opportunity, I'll go ahead and send it out to the advisory committees as well. So the members have the opportunity to, um, track that information as a start, but also, you don't want to be talking, you can always present testimony as an individual on any bills. You just want to be careful and not say that you're talking on behalf of the board or on behalf of the
Right.
advisory committee unless there's been a delegation, as far as that goes. But I do want you to be aware of it. And since you do hold other roles too, perhaps you would want to advocate for it from based on your membership in a different organization or something like that. And so I'll be keeping you all aware of the BSRB bill for sure this spring whenever I hear
Okay.
hearings. So
Thanks. And so just to be clear, especially because we have new people on here, if you sent out an email to us that said, this BSRB bill is coming up, which includes adding a 13th member, from the behavior analysis profession, we could share that information with other people, and that's not a violation of our board or advisory committee membership, correct?
Yeah. So, especially if there's anything that's, public, that's fine to share. The
Okay.
only thing, occasionally, maybe something might be confidential until it is officially released in a public meeting. That's going to be really rare. Most of the times, if we ever hear about a hearing taking place in the future, it's not going to be confidential. It may not be, in the legislative calendar until a certain time, but once that information is public, I'm happy to share it. So
Okay. So just so you guys know that as long as that information is public knowledge, it's okay to share that. That is not, meeting outside of a scheduled meeting. So,
yeah, and I'll try to make it very clear if something is not, if
yeah.
something happens to be confidential, but that, again, that's for a group like this is going to be really rare if that would ever come into place. So
Well, I keep bringing it back to that because that was the one thing that stood out most to me because I was engaged in a lot of advocacy and, involved with a lot of groups. And there was a lot of overlap between those groups and this advisory committee. And so I just don't want anybody to accidentally do something or not do something because they don't have the information. So did any of you see anything else on here that you thought, the changing regs, keeping updated on that? I thought that would be something good we could do as an advisory committee, or David could do as the executive director of the BSRB. Anything else on this that you saw? Some of it has to do with insurance, but that would fall under the purview of a practice group, right? Um,
and Linda, when we do wrap up the conversation on the telehealth, I know we've got a little about half an hour left in the meeting.
mhm.
We may want to go ahead and table some of the items on the agenda.
Yeah.
Leslie was attending today and she was going to walk through some of the recommended edits to the regulations. So
Oh,
I
well,
wanted to
let's
make sure.
table all this stuff, David.
This is really important and it's a great conversation. But I wanted to make sure we got to a few of those before the
Yeah.
meeting. And so,
Are you guys all okay with modifying the agenda? Yeah, I see a lot of thumbs up and heads up. So I'm going to table the continued review and discussion on draft survey of licensees regarding telehealth and artificial intelligence, and a discussion on alternative pathway to licensure. And I suggest we turn the floor over to Leslie,
Okay.
our
And-
illustrious Leslie.
And I'll frame it just before we go to Leslie. Some of you may not have met Leslie, but she's wonderful. She's been the assistant director and licensing manager for the BSRB for several years, and she's worked with the agency for I think 26 years, maybe longer. And so she's been a great asset to the agency. A lot, very helpful for me specifically in my role as executive director for the last 5 years. But in this process we're about to go through, we have brought a lot of the regulations for the professions to the advisory committee the last few years to collect your input and questions and make sure if there were any recommended changes, we incorporated those. In our process of reviewing all of our regulations, there were a handful that we didn't think the advisory committees have really had the opportunity to review and weigh and make comments on for the past few years. So we wanted to make sure that all of them had the opportunity to go before you for you to ask questions. Leslie has identified some recommended changes for some of these regulations. If there are some that there are no recommended changes, we don't have to take any action. If there are some items that there's recommended changes, essentially what I'll do is I'll say, do you have any questions on those recommended changes? Do you have any additional changes you would like to make on these regulations? And then I'll probably say, do you have any objection to this item moving forward to the board with the recommended edits? And if there's no objections, we'll just say that that was consensus of the advisory committee to move those items forward. And sometimes the regulation review process can take a long time. These ones, for the most part, are mostly cosmetic, or we want to review them from time to time to make sure that things get updated and we have the most current items reflected in the regulations. So some of these may not take very long, but if you do have questions, we don't need to rush this process either. So just wanted to outline sort of the expectation here. And you do have these in your packet of material. There's 4 of them. And so we'll go through each one separately, and we'll start with KAR 102-8-4. So I'll turn it over to Leslie and I'll share my screen, and then Leslie can highlight any items in that regulation that she would recommend for edits. So I think you should be able to see KAR 102-8-4, and it's titled Application for Licensure. And like I said, I'll turn it over to Leslie.
So the good thing about your regulations is they aren't that old. So I didn't find a lot of things that need to be improved upon. And I did not find anything in this regulation that needed updating. Unless there's language, the committee, which it's not really, it's kind of a board application. So there's not a lot of, specific language to the profession. I don't think there's anything we need on this one.
Okay. Well, then I'll stop sharing my screen and see if anyone has any questions on this regulation, or if anyone had any recommended edits for that regulation.
I'm not sure if it was specific to that, David, but did we discuss in a previous meeting the specific focus on autism?
I know we have talked about that, I believe, under the definition regulation. Was there a reference under the application regulation?
I don't know if I looked that closely to see if that
Here, let me see if there
that
is.
was specific on there.
I'll share my screen again for that.
Yeah, I just did a search and it's for autism and it didn't find anything.
Okay.
Because you're right, the legislation that created our license, it was a license act, and it was a practice act related to people providing services for folks with autism. And that's something that is Alec, the last item 9 that we'll talk about later.
Okay.
Is that's why I put that on there, discussion on title protection,
Okay.
what it would take to open up that legislation and turn it into a title protection act instead of a practice act.
Thank you, Lynn.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I just have one very tiny cosmetic suggestion. So
Okay.
for the 3B, so everything is capitalized letter, just like the B starts with a small letter. So it's really very minor thing there.
For
3B. Yes, you're right there. That it says arrange is a small letter and everything else is capitalized.
yeah, that is true. I
Yeah.
guess the same could be
Oh
for the
yes, you're right. You found another one.
Yeah, so it'd be
It's
3A and 3B. Mhm.
And
It
also
carries on from A. 3A says about sending things to the board or arrange for a copy. So A and B go together. That's why it's
Mhm.
not capitalized in the reg.
Oh, I see.
And it looks like that is consistent with the 1 and 2. So it seems like when there's a series, whether it's A and B or 1 and 2, the second one it looks like is not capitalized. So
So because the first one, application A, is not capital. But I'm not I'm not an expert in legalese, so
yeah, my guess
Yeah,
is it
so
must have been a preferred style maybe when they were put forward. So
yeah.
I was going to say there are rules that the powers that be have when we have regulations. They determine what gets capitalized and what doesn't. Because
Okay.
we can't even capitalize titles that should be capitalized in regulations. So
yeah.
Wow.
But good question. Thank you for looking through that
yeah.
and for asking about it for sure. That may not be an item that we can change, but I think, in a perfect world, I would love it to be more consistent in terms of having each one of those be capitalized for me.
It's okay. I will live with that.
Any other recommended changes for that regulation? Okay. Well, there's no recommended changes. We don't have to take any action on it. I think we can just reflect in the minutes that the opportunity was made for the advisory committee to review it. There was a decision that it looked good, and so no recommended changes are needed at this point. If the legislature should ever ask, we could just say at this point in time there was a review of this regulation, and so from time to time we want to review them all. So I'll move on to the next one and share my screen again. This is the second one in the series. It is KAR 102-8-6 supervision. And I'll turn it back over to Leslie if she has any recommended edits.
I did not have any recommended edits. I would ask that the committee look at this and see if this is still the standard that they use. Because the ratio of supervision and how much can be group and how often they have to meet was
Right.
all based on assistant behavior analyst supervision. So if it has changed, then the committee would be able to let us know that.
So is this something that BACB would have weighed in on in terms of assistant behavior analyst?
They have requirements for the supervision. Their PICWA or PAM. Do any of you know what the current regulation is? I know they were changing.
And I think Pam may have needed to log off.
Oh yeah, that's right. She did. PICWA, you're
I have a question because earlier, I think Leslie mentioned those hours are based on the BCABA level.
yeah.
Okay, so LBAs also kind of just use the same level requirement across LBAs and LABAs. Am I understanding correctly?
No, so this is specifically for the assistants, right? That
Oh,
BCABA, this is after they've already gotten their credential and now they're licensed to practice. LBAs do not require supervision. LBA, LB, L,
ABA.
associate LABABs still require supervision, particularly according to the BACB.
Okay. Thank you. I was confused a little bit. I was like,
Yeah.
why? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. No.
Thanks. I'm not too familiar with the BCABA level. So, but I'm looking at the handbook, and if you have questions, I can try to find it there. But yeah.
I think last I looked, it was 1 hour for every 20 hours of work. So
Right.
I assume the 12 came in here maybe to promote once a month. Is that where the 12 came from originally?
Yeah.
But
And
the BACB requires it's a ratio of so many hours worked.
Yeah.
For those who are just practicing, not moving on to the higher level.
Yeah. Yep.
so for my understanding is, and I'm doing it right now, currently for the first 1,000 hours, I have to reach at least 5% of my monthly service hours that I have to document and get supervision for. And that's a minimum of 1 hour every 2 weeks. And then ongoing supervision after those first 1,000 hours must be at least the 2% of monthly service hours.
But that's while you're trying to accrue your field supervision hours?
Nope, this is
No?
ongoing. I have to do this from here on.
As a
Forever.
assistant
Yeah.
behavior analyst?
Yep.
So you have to get for your, so it's even prorated by your first 1,000 hours versus subsequent hours?
Yes, ma'am.
So Leslie, the question would be how detailed do we want to be in this? Would it be to look at the regulations in the handbook and recommend changes based on what the current guidelines are? Because it changes over time, right? It used to be called an associate behavior analyst, and now it's an assistant. And the rate of supervision has changed. There's also now a supervision requirement for people that are new BCBAs that for the first, I think it's a year of practice, they need to have a mentor in place or have a plan.
Only if they're supervising candidates, though. It's not if they're supervising RBTs, only if they're supervising candidates for the BCBA.
Yeah.
So Leslie, how crazy do you want us to make you?
Linda, can I add something really
Yeah.
quick? I think what I'm looking at right now is that our ABA requirement potentially is more stringent than BACB requirements for ongoing supervision. So because it does not count like service hours into consideration. So if someone is having very minimal service hours or even like, so I guess potentially people need to be aware of this discrepancy and make sure they get more supervision hours to be compliant. And that's it.
And so I guess we need to decide which regulatory agency we would want to follow.
Well, this is just.
I was going to recommend just since I feel like we need to collect some more information on this topic, and so maybe this would be a good one to table and then bring back that information to continue the discussion the next meeting.
That might be a whole meeting. Just saying.
Well, is there someone who would be, I mean, we can try to find that information, but if any of you have a closer connection to, find that information, is there someone from the group that might volunteer to kind of help collect a little research on this topic?
if we don't have any volunteers, it would be nice. The person I was thinking of was Nikki, only because you're in the thick of it right now.
Yes.
But if we pulled together, or at least sent you the website, or the the handbook that outlines the requirements of those two entities, the ABAI and BACB.
Yes.
Does that work?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
That would be great. And Nikki, if we can help you, feel free to reach out to Leslie and I, and we'll help you out with that.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you,
Well,
Nikki.
yeah, in the interest of time, let's go ahead and move to the other regulations and see if we can
Knock them out.
knock them out. There's two left. There's KAR 102-8-7, and this deals with the topic of license expiration and renewal. And I'll turn it over to Leslie to see if she had any recommended edits on this one.
Yes, so C is in cat, little c is in cat. It talks about each license who fails to renew before its expiration date. Currently, we don't have that. We just got the authority, I guess, to allow people to reinstate their license. So this would actually need to be changed to reinstatement and added to the reinstatement regulation rather than this renewal regulation.
Say that again. Would you say that again?
So C says each new license who fails to renew the license before its expiration date and subsequently applies for late renewal has to answer specific questions about practicing when they weren't licensed. And currently, we haven't started allowing LBAs or LABAs to reinstate. We're working on that regulation now. So this would actually fit better in the reinstatement regulation rather than in the renewal regulation.
Okay. I agree.
So it should be, yeah, taken out of this one unless we put them together. And if we merge them, then it would be under the reinstatement section of it. So
do we have to take does everybody agree with that? I agree with it, because this is a failure, So what would the title then become, the 102-8-7? Would it just be license and expiration? And then if it's a separate document, then that one would be renewal? And
this one is renewal. So it would be renewal and reinstatement.
okay.
Or you'll have one of each.
Yeah, but up at the top of this section, Leslie, where it says 102-8-7, currently it's license, expiration, and renewal.
Right. So it would be and license, comma, expiration and renewal and reinstatement,
Yeah.
comma, and reinstatement.
Yeah, unless it was in a separate document. Yeah.
Right.
I think that makes sense to me. Does anybody have a different opinion? No? Is everybody good with Leslie removing this to include with the other one? Okay, Leslie, you have our blessing.
Thanks.
We will forward that recommended change to the board for their consideration.
Okay.
And down to the last one here. And this is KAR 102-8-8 renewal audit. So when people have a license that's going to expire and they renew their license, 10% are randomly audited. And this kind of outlines some of the process. And I'll turn it over to Leslie. Do you have any recommended edits for this regulation?
Just in number 2, either the original continuing education documents, we need to strike original because we're asking for copies now and allowing people to scan them and email them. And And it's actually easier for us if we get them that way than through the mail and having to mail them back. And
Right.
so,
And sometimes we don't even have an original because if we do an event online, what
right,
PDF is generated and it's not a wet signature, right?
right.
So I
Yeah.
agree with striking the word original. I do have another question. If this is called the renewal audit, in the first sentence, should it be the license renewal date?
For the
Instead of,
And this allows the licensee, because if they renew on the last day,
Mhm.
then we have to have time for them to complete the audit. So we give them 30 days from the expiration date
Mm.
of their license.
And so at that point, then it's just inactive and they would just resume with their original number if they went to renew on the last day? Or would it
So
be,
if they renew on the last day of on the day their license would expire, if they
mhm,
renew that day, their license remains active through the audit.
okay,
And they're supposed to comply within 30 days of that.
right.
And then I think for some of the other professions, we were adding some language just to clarify, if someone is using a third party continuing education
Portal.
portal approved by the board, which would allow for the CE broker process to be included here. So some
Mhm.
general language essentially saying, here is the process that they're, doing things by the regular method, but also we're allowing CE broker to be a part of that audit process too. So
Alec, I see you have your hand up.
How would we handle the accrual of CEUs that don't come with a tangible certification of completion?
There
Good
is a
question.
CEU, there's a different regulation for that. It's the continuing education documentation regulation. And it says what you need to provide. Like if you're on a committee, you have to have a letter from someone or, but there is a regulation that speaks to that.
And then we'd follow that for the
Yeah.
the
Well, and it's kind of weird though, because ethically, we can't have a conflict of interest, but if we're supervising somebody, there needs to be a letter from our supervisee that we supervised them. And that just seems like a conflict of interest. Right? Coercion, could be coercion.
for reference, that documentation of continuing education is at KAR 102-8-10.
-10. I'm gonna write that down.
And
I
the
always make
reason
sure
we're
I
not-
have those, right?
yeah, the reason that's not being reviewed is because the board and the committees had been working on the continuing education regulation more recently, so it's been reviewed in the last year.
Okay.
So with the two recommended changes to basically change it from calling for the original continuing education documents and also adding some language that, use of CE broker is also another method that we use as part of the audit process. Not naming CE broker specifically, but just kind of the language I used earlier, a third party solution for like a portal for continuing education hours. Those were the two recommended changes. Do any of you have any other recommended changes or questions about those?
I don't have a recommendation for this, but since I just went through the audit process,
Mhm.
like the process was easy. The form is difficult.
Okay.
It's like the form is just like a PDF and with very like, you know, it asked me to list all the CE activities. I'm like, there's even no room. So I'm just wanting to provide that suggestion or feedback. Maybe there are ways to make that form a little bit easier to fill out in the future.
Good feedback. I'm taking a note here, and we'll take a look at that.
Thank you.
Well, any other, is there any objection to us forwarding that regulation with the recommended changes? If not, we will forward that one. So thank you for your work on that. I know we're almost at time, but I'll refer it back over to Linda. So
I could go on for the next 15 minutes, but since we have 1 minute left in our meeting, I will succumb to peer pressure and recommend that we look at, make sure you mark your calendars for Friday, December 12th at 1 o'clock. And I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
A motion to adjourn, please.
Thank you. Allison made a motion, Nikki seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Bye.
Fine. Any opposition? All right, motion carries. You guys are all released.
Thank you,
Thank
Linda.
you.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.